lines. This one's a two-parter. So first off, can you tell us more about the development of color symbolism in the show? For example, Oliver, I know you had another interview where you talked about how green lighting was often associated with like safety for the characters. The second part of this question is, I don't know how much either of you influenced or worked with like the costumes at all, but how much did you guys get to interact with the color coding of the characters in the show, and how did you like show that?
Well, the green light is an interesting one because, you know, in filmmaking particularly, green is usually associated with illness or threat, or, you know, something negative. Usually it's something, it's not something you want to see in people's skin. You know, it's always something you work against. So it's a lovely inversion of that trope, you know, on our series, that green is a color of safety and security. So it was great to have that freedom to explore that color. But with regards to the costume, maybe Will can talk to that, because you know, obviously that is always set in place once we turned up.
Yeah, again, it's similar to Marcus's production design. Claire's costume selection, and a lot of that is, you know, done with the sort of show producers. I remember Naira Park really being keyed into what the characters are wearing, and of course, actually the actors themselves, because it's a part of their transformation. But as a director and DOP of 3 episodes of an 8 episode series, we are kind of continuing the story. So it's not necessarily a decision we get to make, but it is one of the reasons why the show has the texture it has the tone it has, and has the coherence it has, because of the selection by the production designer and the costume designer and the makeup designer, because that's what we're photographing, and effectively we're telling the stories of these characters. So, you know, that's something that we're very fortunate to have amazing people who are already putting together. And I think, you know, symbolism of warmth of color, or, you know, the night, obviously a lot of using the blue and silvery moonlight and how you can create tension through that. And, you know, the kitchen was actually, again, some of this comes from production design, but it was a yellow space. It's a warmer, more homely space. So quite often just used to help set a mood, hopefully in almost as in a sense like a subtext, rather than it being too intellectualized. But also it's nice when a show has something that you can key into, which is specific or unique about that show. And obviously the ghost lamps and green being used as a light source in the show is quite a fun thing to play with, which you ordinarily wouldn't get to.
Fascinating. So it was instinctive in some ways, but it sounds like also, Oliver, you were able to sort of experiment with a new way of setting a scene by, you know, using green in a way that it doesn't traditionally get used. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. When oh God, I forgot the character's name. When she jumps through the window, what's the character's name, Will? She's in the house and she jumps through the glass window and escapes down the road. Turns up I've forgotten the character's name now. But
you'll too. There's probably dozens of people screaming it right now.
Yeah. Ellie, I see Ellie in the chat.
Bloomer to everybody. Yeah, thank you. Ellie jumps through the window and runs off down the street, and then the gang sort of peer out of the window. It was so, you know, enjoyable to pour green light on their faces, because there was a safety street light just down the road. So even though that light actually in reality wouldn't have reached that far to the house, I just thought because we built that exterior on set for that stunt, I just took the liberty of lighting their faces with the green, knowing that the audience knew what that green meant, you know, and why it was there, rather than just some random color. And so much more interesting than a sodium orange yellow street light or just a white LED. You know, it was really fun to play with that.
In your defense, the audience don't know it's Ellie at that point, because it's the intruder.
Oh no, is that a spoiler?
Yeah, no, you were
if people are in here, I think they know what happens.
Yeah. Our hope is that people have watched the show if they're watching this right now.
Good.
Wonderful. Well, so our next question is for William, but Oliver, if you have any thoughts on this, we'd love for you to jump in as well. One of the most enthralling things about the show is the chemistry between the 3 lead actors. Can you comment on how you cultivated and showcased that chemistry?
You know, as I can caveat every answer to every question with, is a big team that works on the show, and that goes from other directors to producers to dialect and acting coaches, and it really is a community that you work with in order to help the cast feel comfortable and for them to have sort of shared experiences that they can then bring to life on screen. And so even from, you know, you think about the early casting, which I wouldn't have been involved in, there would have been chemistry tests. And I know, you know, complete fiction looked long and hard for the right people. And a part of that is seeing them on screen together. So by the time Oliver and I are working with the cast, the cast know each other very well. And we're sort of just trying to tell each moment of the story in the way that, you know, that works to for that particular episode or for that particular scene, whether it's a, you know, a happy moment, a sad moment, an intimate moment. There's a lot of history that goes into each performance within each scene. So, you know, I was in a fortunate place where I'm really not having to cultivate much. I'm more kind of, I don't know, watering an already beautifully grown plant and just helping it to keep growing, really. So yeah, they're a real privilege to work with, to be honest. So I feel very lucky to have sort of got to work with this cast.
It was amazing how bonded they were as a threesome, wasn't it? By the time we turned up, it was like they'd known each other for years, but these were three disparate young actors who hadn't done an awful lot before this show. And yet when we arrived, it was like, you know, we were the guests at the party, you know, and it was a thrill to watch them. I mean, and technically they were superb. You know, I mean, I sort of belied their age, extraordinary skill set, you know, and then you've seen it in some of the intimate scenes between them, each individually. They brought so much to the show. It was a pleasure to watch.
And not only are they delivering the performance, but in some of the scenes, they're doing sword choreography, imagining ghosts that's probably a tennis ball on a stick, and also lighting the scenes quite often with their own torches. So they had a lot to do.
Yeah, that was tough. You know, the torches are such a key prop for the characters. That, you know, we had sort of a number of sort of debates about how the torch would interact with a ghost, and, you know, how bright can a room be that allows an audience to see into the room but the torch needs to do the seeing for them and therefore for us. And where the actors would point the torches, therefore, was really crucial. So when you see any one of them walking down a corridor and pointing the torch around, they were doing that very carefully. And we'd often ask them to, well, don't point it at the lens at this point, because, you know, we won't see anything if you do it. But if you can point it on the wall here or down on the floor here. So they were doing so much processing as well as performing so beautifully. It was incredible.
So there was a whole other step of choreography, aside from, you know, the swords. There was also the torch choreography. That's really fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, pretty extraordinary. You know, I mean, forget their age. Lots of actors would find that difficult. And, you know, they had to concentrate on that and, you know, emote and fight and fall. You know, all of those things. It's pretty extraordinary.
All at once. Yeah, absolutely.
Dang, I don't think I can pull that off.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I could do it either. Yeah.
I was really glad the bloopers were released. I think that just gives a little insight into, you know, the chemistry behind the scenes, because it was a really fun set and a really nice set to be on. You know, we laughed a lot.
Yeah, that's something we've all commented on, and, you know, that definitely came off just looking at the photos behind the scenes and everything, was just how absolutely lovely it seemed like to be, as, you know, as a place to work.
It's become a bit of a running joke for us too, that like the chemistry reads, no one's seen the chemistry reads. We've seen that like one photo of Cameron and Ruby, so everyone's like, show us. But yeah, it's definitely something that Lock Nation has noticed, so it's really cool to like get to hear how it was like captured and stuff. All right, so this next question is for both of you. So as you both touched on a bit, it's a big team that puts all this together. So how do the various directors, photography and directors of episodes work together to create a cohesive style and vision under Joe Cornish?
I think it's because there's a consistent team running throughout, from, you know, Bradley and Rachel, who you'll hear speaking later, to the production designer, costume, as I've mentioned before. So in a way, you are a part of a bigger machine that's ongoing. So there is a lot of consistency. And obviously with Joe's work, we could see what they were doing, and we could watch early edits and see how things were coming together and be inspired by that, and quite often see what they were doing and think, well, how can we one up this? You know, it's quite fun to look at what the group before you's done and think, all right, the bar's been set, let's go for that. So and there was some we actually started shooting during Joe's episode, just doing some little pickups for him, and we shot some of our scenes. Lucy waking up outside the house after jumping out of the window when the house is on fire, with where she wakes up and can't find Lockwood. I think that was the first thing we shot, and we shot it because they were shooting episode 1 at that location. So there was a bit of dovetailing, which was helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that what Joe and Tom did in terms of the sort of the technical side of it gave us a great foundation to work from and to depart from as well, because the stories go off in different directions. So we don't have to sort of adhere to very strict rules. I mean, we use the same camera, we use the same lenses and the same sets, obviously, but we had different stories. That's the wonderful thing about the show, is that you've got all the episodes have something unique about them as well as something in common. So although, you know, there was a language there and a continuity there, it was also really freeing for Will and I to sort of explore in new ways. You know, there was never one episode where we felt we were just retreading a well-trodden path. It was never like that. So that was one of the joys of it.
And even things that were established. So there's a visual language to Lucy when she's listening. And I think Joe called it a psychic push-in, or just a psychic push, where they tracked into her in that moment. But we would do the same thing, but play with the speed of it, and whether it was slower, or we used what are called diopters that would go in front of the lens, which would, Oliver, you would be able to explain this better than me, but reduce the depth of field so that you lose more of the background. And we sort of took on the visual language, and where I had a bit of space to play around with it, whilst it's still being obvious that was the experience Lucy was going through as she was listening for ghosts.
So you had that happy medium of there being, you know, a blueprint, but then you could also build and expand on that. That's lovely.
Yeah, in a way, Joe had the hardest job of all with episode 1, and the writers too, that, you know, there's so much information to convey in episode 1. You've got to build the world for the audience to know where these characters are going. All that backstory of Lucy's, leaving home and coming to London, and, you know, that was so important. But once you've got to the end of episode 1, the subsequent episodes can then really spring forward and had a great deal of freedom creatively for us, thanks to the work that they did in episode 1.
But there was even in our episode that were Joe's ideas, and even ideas that happen in post-production. So when we transition to Lucy in the bath, when she's in a bit of a moment of reverie and she's looking into the cup, we played on the day with trying to get her reflection through the glass. And obviously we played a lot with reflections and mirrors in terms of connecting with the other side. But I think it was Joe's idea in post to actually create the shot, the transition of her inside the water as the glass twists. So, you know, it was collaborative across all the episodes.
And that does really show, there is, you know, to some degree an individual style, but that is something that we've all been really impressed with, was just the pure consistency across all the episodes, despite how many people were working on them.
We should shout out also to the colorist, the chap who did the grading of the show, Asa Sewell at Warner Brothers Delane Lee. He's a superb colorist, and what's wonderful about Asa is that if he loves a show, he really pours himself into it as well. So it's a great deal of craft downstream, as it were, you know, in terms of getting consistency and continuity in, you know, from what we did on set to what is polished and, you know, in post-production, and all the VFX integrated in at that point, because without that being successful, the whole thing wouldn't work. So I think, hats off to those guys too.
Yeah, so you guys had like lighting on, like, for the ghosts too as you were filming. It wasn't entirely like post-production, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was something that was central to the methodology that Complete Fiction wanted it to feel organic and in camera, as we say, rather than it just being like green screen and post-production, which is, can be, we had to rely on that, to varying degrees, but the kind of part of the essence of the show is how real it feels. And so we'd either have what we would called a shmoo, which is basically an actor in green but covered in LED lights that are all programmed to dance around and be expressive in various ways. And we'd have them running through the set being the ghost, but then we'd have to shoot it without them. But what that meant is that you'd get real light falling on characters' faces or on walls or on surfaces that was actually real, wasn't put on in post-production. So the actors could really engage with what was going on with the ghost, even though they obviously wouldn't see the ghost. So that was a real thrill to have that working on set. And we used lots of different devices. It wasn't just the shmoo. We used different kind of light sources and different kind of SFX as well, with sparks and for the salt bombs and all of that sort of thing. So as much as we could, we did it in camera on set to keep it real, I think.
Nice. All right, so moving on to our next question. So talking again about sort of the creation of the atmosphere of the show, the score and music had such a huge influence on the audience and sort of just the atmosphere of the show. So can you speak at all to like either the development of the soundtrack or how you were influenced by the music at all as you could conceptualize certain scenes?
Well, as I say, just seeing the costume test with Bauhaus Bela Lugosi's Dead on, there was a sense there of the type of music that was going to work really well. And I think, there was a needle drop we had in one of our episodes of The Cure where just anything that sort of had a spooky undertone and something a little bit decaying and strange and uncanny about music, and especially because obviously the show exists in a pre-digital world, the music certainly comes from that era. So and that then informed the music that the flight put together for the show, and it creates a lot of atmosphere. But also, like, Joe was very keen that it was propulsive, that it wasn't too meandering or too just atmospheric in like a slow sense. It always had energy. But again, I think you can go back to the Bela Lugosi's Dead track as a bit of a blueprint for that, because it's uncanny and strange, but it has that beat that propels you through it. So yeah, that certainly was helpful, hearing that.
That absolutely. I think that's something we've all commented a lot to a point you made, William, was that how it sort of sets, the digital world is a huge part of being alive in 2023, but they're living in an alternate universe. So it's interesting seeing them use like a tape recorder, and then that idea is sort of reinforced by having, pre-digital music. So that's really fascinating to hear about.
It was great for me because I bought all those new when they were released.
Good throwback for you.
I've still got the vinyl over there. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we've touched on this a bit already, but there are a lot of very visually striking locations in the series. Can you tell us a bit about the process of location scouting for your episodes?
Yeah, a lot of time spent on a minibus driving around, or in separate cars some of the time because of COVID back then. Driving and looking for interesting spaces, and often going out and it not working, and knowing what you were aiming for and what you needed and what the book and what the script required. So yeah, often we mentioned Mentmore Towers, but I think that we'd maybe 6 or 7 we'd explored. A location scout is going out and we're looking at libraries and libraries of images. I think one of the hardest was actually, the the cellar with the well beneath Fairfax is like property is like that was actually a medieval barn, which I don't think makes a huge amount of sense in terms of the architecture, but yeah, how could we find this space that doesn't exist? We couldn't build it, so we built into a medieval barn somewhere in Surrey. So you're often surprised by where the location comes from. It might often not be, what you set out to find. And yeah, with locations like that, they can be quite fantastical as well. So, the roof actually is CGI, because obviously it was a timber roof to an agricultural barn, so it wasn't quite right for something subterranean. I quite like just walking around the cemetery, if I'm honest, just taking pictures of the cemetery. I think probably one of my first social media posts is just a picture of that space, and it's helped to set the tone.
What was
London
great
has some great cemeteries. Sorry, go on, Oliver.
I was just going to say about the cemetery. I mean, what Will did, which I thought was a great idea, that for our episodes, because there's that kind of, I don't know, you call it a festival, Will. What was it kind of with everybody in there with the lights and everything? I don't know what we called it in the script, but the fact that it wasn't a deserted cemetery, this was kind of a busy place, and so it allowed us to sort of take liberties with putting these sort of work lights everywhere. And then Will had the great idea of, bringing smoke at what we call atmos into the landscape. Now, on a nighttime exterior in London in the winter, you just think that's just going to disappear. If you pump smoke in, it's just going to waft away and go over Kensal Green somewhere and across to Paddington. But weirdly, we had about 4 or 5 of the stillest, quietest nights when we were shooting there. And that atmos that just hung around in sort of great clouds over the area we were shooting. I mean, to say we lucked out it was brilliant, because it just really brought a wonderful atmosphere into that space that could have just been black. There's no light there naturally. So with these work lights that we placed in depth all the way down the avenues, and then the atmos hanging there in the air, it was just like an old-fashioned sort of Victorian London smog. It was brilliant for us. Really, really allowed us to, and it was great for the actors too, because they could really see that and engage with it. Their torches had some effect in the smoke as well. So yeah, it really created a sort of an eerie vibe. It was good.
Yeah, the cemetery really comes alive at night. But that's a mood setting thing as well. I think atmosphere, and we really pushed for smoke and texture and like it, because it adds to the mood of the show. I really like watching films and TV where, I don't know, it's raining outside and you've got, the heat on, the fire on, and what have you, and you're watching something and it's just you feel cozy because what you're looking at feels kind of cold and misty.
And absolutely, that came through. Sorry.
The catafalque was real, I mean, that building is there, that takes you down, and with a stained glass window. I mean, it's for us as filmmakers, I mean, what a joy to have that there. That wasn't Marcus's genius. That was just there. That one, it was in one moment we actually had a location that without needing to do anything to it, was absolutely spot on for the vibe of the episode.
It's funny though, we're all there togged up in loads of thermal and like very warm, and the cast are running around like Cameron's in a suit and shirt trying to keep them warm, and they're out there doing their thing in November in the middle of night in London, freezing cold, with someone blowing smoke in their face. So yeah, they suffered for their art.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine like trying to like look relaxed when you're just freezing in the middle of November. That's got to be hard.
Didn't have the scene set on the bank of the Thames with Ruby and Cameron jumping in the water. I mean, so yeah, that was probably colder, I imagine.
I would say. So in the graveyard scene, there's a lot of like really cool camera work, especially as they're walking up to the grave and the camera's turning. And this sort of connects to our next question, which is submitted to us from Lord Have Mercer on Twitter. So the Red Room sequence is one of the most beautiful visually in the series. So how did you approach this scene?
Fun fact, the blood was supposed to fly at them, and there was, effectively bullets of blood flying, which is what we shot. And we went through a lot of testing, a lot of very long Zoom chats, longer than this one, of just deciding how this would work. And then on the day, we even, the incidental light we talked about, where everything emits light, we had to do that pass. And then we looked at the edit, and we're playing with the edit, and we realized it was more tense for the blood just to be seeping through the walls, and there was more of a sense of dread from that than there was a whole sword fight choreography which was cut out of them basically deflecting the blood, but it just felt more tense and slightly scarier, just that it was this blood seeping. And we did a lot of, as you mentioned, rotating the camera, like almost like a ghost POV, or if you're coming from the other side, can things be upside down? We just try and push ourselves and make strange, which meant that, we could have a lot of fun with how scenes were shot. One of the difficult things with this though, Oliver, wasn't it? How do you portray darkness? Because obviously it's a beautiful set, and there's CGI and there's blood, and got our cast to see, and they're lighting it with their torches, but it's supposed to be dark. There's no windows, so that was something that you worked really hard on.
That was a challenging space, wasn't it? The Red Room. I think apart from that, the fact that it's not very red, it was red, but rather brilliantly, the production design team had given the wallpaper a slight sheen, so you don't need to light it with a lot of light. You can reflect light into it, so that's a really good way of keeping the light levels down. And the surfaces were just slightly reflective. And what you'd normally do for a scene in a very dark room, you just put a very low level of exposure in, and normally into sort of the center of the room, and you keep it off the walls. But in this instance, we had to be able to see the walls a bit so that you would see the blood on the walls. So the electrical team put a strip lights all the way around the edge of the room, just down lighting the walls by itself. So they weren't doing anything else but just skimming the walls, so that when we exposed for it, you just saw the shape of the walls, so that the VFX team could put the blood on the walls. Because if we didn't light the walls to a certain degree, you wouldn't see the blood. And blood is one of those things, I don't know if you noticed in movies, it often looks black, not red. Blood is a very difficult thing to emulate artificially, and it's a very difficult thing to photograph well. So it was about getting a balance between being able to see it, getting the viscosity and the reflective quality of it, but also seeing the color. And I think Sean Mathiasen and his VFX team did a great job with that, because it has to be, you have to know what it is, you have to be able to see it, enough of it to get scared by it and to flee from it as well. So I think, it was a very challenging set, but it worked well, I think.
One of the things that you might realize if you've seen any behind the scenes stills from that set, is that there's no ceiling on the set, which is so Oliver could light it and control the light. Because if you've got the ceiling on there, how are we lighting this huge space in such a particular way? So, again, invisible visual effects, effectively, they had to put the roof in.
Yeah, we photographed the ceiling at Mentmore Towers, the building where they come into. There's a separate room there, a beautiful room that Kubrick actually used for one of his scenes, and it had a very ornate corniced ceiling, and so we photographed that as a reference. And then the post-production, they recreated it to go over my lighting rig that was there.
Incredible, really. Thank you so much. Sorry, go on, Katie.
I was gonna say, do you prefer to shoot on a set or on location? I know there are challenges to both, but is there one you prefer?
Will? the project or on the scene, there's certain things I've filmed in the past where it really has to be on location. I think on a long running shoot with a crew that needs looking after because they're all working long hours, getting back to a studio is quite nice for everyone because you're not getting trucks in, you're not getting trucks out. We're in a constant base, and yeah, I think it's a nicer shooting environment, but sometimes you have to go and get out in the field and get dirty.
And also, I think the amount of the sheer number of scenes that take place in the house, that we shot in Islington as the exterior, you could never have shot there in the interiors there. It's too small. It's a tiny house. So Marcus created the house in Ealing Studios, and all the walls could move, and we could take the ceilings off and do everything we needed to do to it to shoot all the different number of scenes that we had there. I think locations really create an atmosphere, and they force you to shoot in an interesting way. But inevitably, you're going to need to build some aspects of it, particularly for a piece like this where you've got a lot of visual effects and special effects, explosions and things that we wouldn't be able to do on location. Like the scene that Will talked about, our very first scene that we shot with Lucy jumping off the balcony in episode 1, is it? Is it episode 1? Yeah. That location was in Ealing. It's a lovely house in Ealing, but obviously for to do the burning and everything, they had to take a section of that and recreate it in the stage.
There's some restrictions to the stage, like filming on a stage, because if you think about the house, the sort of entrance hallway, and you turn right and you go into sort of the lounge, and then you go up the stairs to the bedrooms, down the stairs to the kitchen. Once you're past that door to the kitchen, it's a different set. So that just opened up onto a wall in Ealing. So we'd often, how you connect those spaces, or, how you have, Ruby walking up through there when she, hears that Ali and Cameron have come back when she's woken up, I think in episode 4, that can be quite tricky because if she's coming through an open door, there's no kitchen behind it. So those are the kind of things you have to sort of hoops you have to jump through a little bit.
And Lucy coming down from her bedroom to the basement is actually going through 4 sets, is it, Will? 4 separate sets? Because obviously we wouldn't want to build them too many on top of each other. Sometimes you need to have a staircase going up, but they would have all been built separately. And we might even have had to shoot those on different days to go from one set to another, just to get down through the house.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was a nice place to spend lunch, though. I often found that literally the image behind us now, and there's a piano which would be just off here. You hear someone playing on the piano at lunch, and it was really soothing. And like everywhere's quite busy, but actually just sitting down is like quite obviously very comfortable sofas as well. So somewhere quite nice to just take 5 minutes at lunch and think about what you're going to do in the afternoon. So they were quite nice sets just to sit in and enjoy.
Yeah, we thought this would be a really nice, cozy place for us all to talk. The sitting room of Portland Row.
I think where we're technically sat is where Cameron and Ruby would have had to have jumped onto the sofa, the little armchair, when the seance goes wrong. Pretty sure.
Oh my gosh, I love that. All right, amazing. So I think you've got the next question.
Yes, our next question is from Ed Latham on Twitter. The underwater scenes in your episodes are very beautiful and must be very complex to film. Could you describe some of the technical and safety aspects of filming underwater, especially with actors?
Yeah, well, firstly, you should know that to film in what we call a tank, which is a stage with with a great volume of water, like a swimming pool, but in a controlled filming set at Pinewood Studios, it's very expensive, and you need specialist underwater camera people who know how to film, and specialist electricians who know how to light and to work with them. There are a number of underwater scenes in different episodes, so we try to film them all together. within, I don't know how many days we were there, a couple of days. So when Lucy and Lockwood jump off the warehouse and plunge into the water, I shot that for that episode, even though that wasn't my episode, because Will and I were there already doing Lucy
What's
underwater.
that, the last shot of the entire shoot was them jumping into the water?
I think it was because Ruby loved doing it, and it was difficult to get her out of it because she just really took to it.
Her last shot of the show was jumping in the water.
Because we were shooting her with Annabelle Ward was the ghost of, isn't it, under the water there?
And they had to learn how to control their, like, it isn't as simple as just you've got support divers and you're tethered to the bottom of the pool. Like they had to do training and learn how to empty their lungs to go down and to hold their breath. And then there's a signal for when they've they need to breathe. So yeah, again, fair play to the cast, because there was debates of, can we achieve this? Can we do this? Do we need to fake it and shoot it in a studio? But it was great. We got to do it, for real.
Ruby was brilliant, wasn't she? Because she really took to it as a process and would want to do another take after another take. And, there's also so many things that happen underwater that you can't predict, like where the hair is going to go, the little bubbles that appear on people's faces that just stick there. And so you've got to, factor all of that in. I don't know if you've seen any of those sort of like Avatar or Aquaman, a lot of or Shape of Water. A lot of those scenes are shot in the dry on the stage, and that they will put skull caps on, and then their hair is a post-produced element. Whereas what we try to do is be organic as we could. That's the kind of rule of thumb for the show. And fortunately, Ruby was game for a few takes underwater, and the hair was doing interesting things. And the actress playing Annabelle Ward also had this fantastic mane of red hair. And also because in the script, in the story, it's not clear. It's scripted. What was it described as? Well, like ambient space or abstract space?
Yeah, it's definitely a dream space more than literal.
Yeah. So we weren't sort of wedded to answer the question about having shafts of blue light. It's not about being underwater. It was about being in an ethereal space that was kind of mysterious and ghostly in its own right. And because that performer had this fantastic, mane of red hair, the warmth of the sort of yellowy, sickly light coming through seemed to be the right thing to do, because it brought that out, I think, and made it more of an unusual space, not just sort of people floating around at the bottom of a swimming pool.
It's incredible. That's really incredible.
Yeah, as a swimmer, I'm very, very familiar with the difficulties of doing anything underwater and how much your hair really does go everywhere you don't want it to go. So that's pretty amazing. So our next question is, the bandage scene, as it is referred to by fans, is one of the most popular scenes from the series. What were your experiences staging and directing that scene? And I'm pretty sure that's from someone, but I didn't have the credit written down. So someone on Twitter and Instagram, this is your question.
I'm sure they'll let us know.
I'm sure.
Might have been a question from a few people, I imagine.
Yeah, I think so.
I think a scene like that is mildly intimidating, because it's good, because you've read the pages and you've read the entire scripts, and any scene doesn't stand on its own. It's an accumulation of characters growing to that point, and obviously at that point something very poignant happens, and you just want to do it service. Ironically, the day that we were scheduled to shoot this scene and the day that we did shoot this scene, I had been near someone who tested positive for COVID, and I wasn't actually allowed on set. So I was in a Perspex cubicle. They had to clear the set so that I could go on with Oliver at a safe distance, and we talked through how we were going to do it. I then went back to my Perspex cubicle with what we called a witness camera, so I could see the set and obviously my usual sort of monitor feed. And the cast could come over to me, which they found hilarious, by the way, just laughing at me stuck in this Perspex box, whilst I'm trying to have a serious conversation about the emotion of the scene, which obviously they were more than capable of handling and just chatting over, and then went off, and I just sat in my box and watched their incredible performance and thought, yeah, that's good, guys. I think you've done a good job here. And And what's fun is then like finding little angles, like the shot where you see there's a lot of tactile finger touches or moments where, and some of it's scripted, specifically like that one, and others I think are improvised in other scenes that I know fans have picked up on. So yeah, it was an unusual way to have to work that, wasn't it, Oliver?
Yeah, it was challenging, not ideal, I have to say, but the cast did a brilliant job. I remember what I discovered on that scene was, I think we started on Ruby's side. I think we did Ruby's side first. And so I lit Ruby, and we didn't want to do 2 camera shooting because we just wanted to break it down and keep it more intimate. So I think we shot Ruby's side first, and I lit her, with there's meant to be a practical light, a light by the bed. And so I used that to motivate the wrap on her, and you saw her eyes beautifully and all of her emotion came through. And then when we came round to Cameron's side, I think one of my electricians moved the light over to where I was going to do the reverse lighting for him. And we stopped at a point where the shadow of her head went across his face. And I said, stop, because it was really interesting because her shadow sort of went across his face like that. And now normally that would be, anathema, and it just you wouldn't really let that, you'd clean that out. But there was something about it that brought out a kind of a darkness and a duality to his character. So we left it in, and so he sort of played around with it. I think he was sort of aware of it, that his eyes were going in and out of the light, and it sort of added something really interesting to the scene rather than it being too open and notionally romantic. It was actually a much more interesting scene visually than it could have been. So yeah, it was happy accident.
And even as close-ups, they're in each other. It's so intimate that they're really in each other's close-up, and because they're sat on a bed, you can shoot across the front of them, and you've got half a profile of one person whilst they're talking to the other, so you can always see their reaction or their performance to the very intimate scene that's going on. So that was nice to see come together in the edit. But yeah, it's a joy for us to get to direct and light a scene like that, because you just read the script and it's all there in the script. I think any good scene it's all there on the page already, and you're just trying to do it justice.
That's fascinating. I love stories of like happy accidents, and of William being stuck in a box. That's just the cherry on top of that whole story. We do have just one last question for you before we move to the direct Q&A, if that's all right. We both know that you're very accomplished professionals outside of the show. Oliver, you have your fascinating Vault Face project. William, you had your brilliant debut film, Gwen. Do you have any favorite or upcoming projects you'd like to discuss?
Oliver?
Okay, well, I think I'm allowed to talk about. I'm currently in a pre-production for a show which couldn't be more different from Lockwood. It's a romantic comedy called The Road Trip, which I'm just getting into pre-production on at the moment, and looking forward to it. But yeah, no ghosts in that one.
And I'm staying in the world of magical realism, and when I really wanted to be involved in Lockwood and Co, and in order to do it, I had to pause a project that I was co-writing, which is another Netflix project, which is a film, and it's about a vampire, about a young woman who gets bitten by a vampire and has to go and cure themselves by finding the person that did it to them. It's kind of a revenge story, and we're very, very close. Now the strikes are over, we've been able to get back to it. So the working title was Smile, but then that became another film. So the working title is now Blood Sugar. So hopefully that's what happens next. But you never know. So you just have to keep going and keep on writing and keep reading other projects. So, hopefully something as exciting as Lockwood and Co comes up again. But yeah, it's about, I quite like being patient and finding the right thing to do.
Well, you've both garnered a lot of fans, so I'm sure much of Lock Nation will be very excited to see all of your future projects. So with that, we do have the direct Q&A, if that's all right with you guys. I know we're a little over time, but we can move on to our first person if you want to introduce them, Katie.
Yeah, so our first question comes from Kelly Pratt 27 from Instagram. So Kelly.
Hi, my name is Kelly. Thank you so much for taking time to be here today, answer all of our questions. I've had so much fun, and I'm sure everybody else has too. My question is about the opening titles for the show. So the opening titles portray the exposition and rules of the world of the problem and this like quasi-dystopian London so well. Do you have any insight onto how the opening titles for the show were made and or how it influenced your work?
I don't think it was originally designed in that way, but I think it became quite clear that context had to be set. I think Oliver and I could talk about it, but not take credit for it. I think that's very much like Naira and Complete Fiction and Rachel Bradley, who you'd hear later, and Joe sort of driving and designing that. But it's certainly something that we witnessed evolve. And it is really important for maybe people who hadn't read the books to understand the world they're in so they can really buy into the characters, and then in doing so sets the tone as well. So yeah, I mean, it's hopefully people don't skip titles on when they're watching it. Hopefully they do take it in and enjoy it.
Yes, it's a lesson to stick around for the titles, because on that show, if you don't see the titles, you're depriving yourself of a lot of really important information, I think.
And good music.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, everyone's a big fan of the opening credits music, so no worries here about us skipping that. We are very much watching the opening credits.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Kelly. Next up, we have Rachel V. Carey on Instagram. Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Thanks, guys. I'm a filmmaker, so I loved a ton of the choices that were made on the show. My question was about the motif of just in general shooting through glass, and in particular in episode 4 there were these great moments of shooting through mirrors, and it runs through the show, but I wondered if you guys could talk about that, how you thought about it, and how you approached that particular motif.
Oliver, did you want to go on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, credit to Marcus Rowland, production designer, smart enough to know that they could be a useful facet in, pardon the pun, in shot making, whether it's in the house on the landing, so that you could be looking in one direction, but then going, your sight line going in another direction. When you're working in a small space, it's terrific to be able to start a shot in a mirror and then to find things outside of the mirror. So when Ruby's coming down the stairs, we find her in the glass and then come off it. But also the mirror itself can add texture. Like, when you get mirrors that are really old and they have that sort of textured background, I mean, that's just lovely to photograph through. It adds another layer of mystery and texture. But we were also finding glass and refractions all over the place, weren't we? Well, once we we were starting to think about that as part of our process. I think in the Mentmore Towers, in the Coomberry Hall, the old party detritus, there was like chandeliers and candelabras and stuff, and there were these baubles of crystal that would just hang from these chandeliers, and we could sort of shoot through them and they would refract the space, making it sort of more mysterious and adding little bits of color. I just remember though that the day was like haunted by the fact, not haunted literally, but haunted by the fact that when one of those baubles moved a little bit, you had to wait like 10 minutes for it to stop moving, and everybody just had to wait before we could do another take. It's still moving, stop. But yeah, so it was lovely to use those devices to explore characters and different sides of people with sort of the metaphor of split
in that case. The sound design and the way that I think that shot develops through the glass as Lucy is listening to the ghost. So there's almost like a spooky twinkle in the chandelier that we add to with sound effects of like what happened in that space. So it's really quite fun to play with of what's on the other side, and there's something hidden elsewhere. And so mirrors, I think, are a lot of fun with that kind of just connection of something else, something other, and the same as like Oliver was saying, that in making this, you want something that feels slightly ancient and aged, and texture from smoke or from really worn down costume and production design, or from an old mirror. It just sort of adds to the overall tapestry. So yeah, it's something we definitely looked to do. So yeah, thanks for the question, Rachel. That was really good.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it, Rachel.
All right. So on to our next question. So this comes from Camilla, also known as Dark Cycle Pizza on Twitter.
Yes, hello. Thank you for a very, very enlightening hour. It's been super exciting, especially the William the Box. My question is for Oliver. So what sequence or shot on the show do you think most represents you as a director of photography, and why?
What shot? I tell you what I think about a lot, and I reference. There's a scene that's on Hyde Park Corner at night when Lucy has got out of the taxi and has stormed off, and Lockwood goes after her. For which episode is that? I'm so bad at episodes. Which episode is that?
That's episode 2, I think, isn't it?
Okay.
It's
Right
just
after
from
they go to-
Deepak.
I trust everybody else except myself, my own memory. Anyway, they storm off. She storms off, and they stop in the middle of this sort of the sand, the horse track that's along the bottom of Hyde Park Corner. And that scene between the two of them, on the one hand, was hugely technically difficult because we're in the middle of central London at night. We've got Lamborghinis driving up and down Knightsbridge, people showing off in their cars, making a dreadful racket. These actors having to concentrate, a big emotional scene, and they're in the middle of a park surrounded by 100 film crew and lights and everything, and there was such an intimacy there and an intensity of performance between the two. I was so impressed with those two actors at that point. There's one shot of them which pulls back. It's slightly longer lens, and we were shooting on these old vintage lenses called DNAs, which are vintage glass. They're not new lenses. They use old glass that has a lot of character and a lot of flavor to it. And especially when you're shooting wide open, when you open up a lens to let the maximum light through, they really come to life. And what happened on that shot, you'll notice that the trees in the background become sort of this swirl of green and of like a smear. And it seemed to frame the two of them in a really romantic and an interesting way. And it's not something I'd planned. I'd planned the shot, but not anticipated the effect that would have at that aperture. And I think, even though, it was a fortunate find, I think, it's one of my favorite shots in the whole series.
There's another shot that we found in making that scene, which I think is one of my favorites, where we're behind them and they turn to each other and they're lit by the flare. And I remember seeing that and we were like, okay, we need to capture that and elongate that moment of just the two each side of the frame looking over each other's, like, again, an intimate moment between the two lit by a flare. And I don't think we planned that, did we? We discovered it.
I did. I remember shooting flare tests because I wanted to know how much light I was going to get from a flare. Because you shoot all the time. So when we were shooting in Islington at the house exterior, we shot some tests of different size flares, different types, just to know how much light you were going to get from them. But yeah, it was lovely, that shot, wasn't it? It had a really, it was just the two of them in this little island of light, and the sort of the ghostly atmosphere there. So that was one of my favorite shots for sure.
That's such a fantastic scene. It's one of my favorites for sure. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Camilla. So our last question, it's for William, but it's from Vicky.Santana on Instagram. She couldn't be here today, so one of our wonderful moderators, Viv, is going to ask the question on her behalf.
And hi again. So, William, the question is, what did you like the most about directing your episodes in the series?
Oh, that's a difficult question. And I'm definitely not going to give one answer. the world building, being a part of that world. Like I read Jonathan Stroud like growing up as a teenager, so getting to be a part of, bringing his books to life. I read the Bartimaeus trilogy. All of that is incredible, and the tone of the world and the stories. But actually, I think the thing that I look back on most fondly and the thing I miss is the community. It's the kind of family you build when you're making a project. And I certainly look back very fondly at the sort of time we had making this and the people we met. And yeah, I think that's definitely, looking back at it now, the standout for me.
And that really comes through, that feeling of family behind the scenes really comes through. And I think it's that passion that has made it such an incredible series and has brought all of us here today. So we thank you so much.
You see it living on in everything that you're doing and everything that you can see online. And honestly, I've never known such a creative and artistic fandom for a series or for any project. Like the edits, I remember seeing edits coming out of just, I was like, making this needs to be working professional. These are incredible. And the fan art, concept art, all of it, incredible stuff.
Katie is one of those editors, so
Wow.
I'm sure she's very happy to hear
that.
that.
On at least one or two of my edits, so thank you very much.
I was
have
impressed.
a grand old time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Viv. All right, so we are officially out of time. Myself, Katie, Oliver, William, we want to thank everyone so much for your wonderful questions, for spending your morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is for you with us. Thank you again to all the ClusterCon folks running this event behind the scenes. We love and appreciate you all so much. If we haven't told you that 100 times already, William and Oliver, we are so incredibly grateful to you for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. You've done incredible work in your careers and bringing this show to life, and it absolutely, I can say with 100% certainty, would not have been nearly as amazing without each of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And fun to be. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to sort of delve back into it all.